that people are really excited to hear about. I mentioned to Bren and Kristen that this is really the first time that Journey Clinical has hosted programming and education related to Ibogaine. So all of you have, of course, completed plenty of CAP education, PAP education. We just hosted last week a webinar on Spravato, and the recording for that will be published soon as well. And we hosted a very exciting panel last night here in New York City about sort of other future pathways to accessing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, including psilocybin. It featured Dr. Rachel Yehuda, who's done a lot of really fascinating research on MDMA for veterans. So there's been a lot of discussion and new content coming out, especially in light of the recent executive order. So we felt like this was a good time to just have a conversation, specifically since Ibogaine was part of that conversation. What is that? A lot of you who registered for this event had a lot of questions about what that is and what that could look like and how it's relevant. So we are really, really honored today to have Christin Slough with us um, from the American. Oop, I want to make sure I get it right. Americans for Ibogaine, yes, organization that uh, Bren Seed, a wonderful Journey Clinical member, has helped facilitate this interview and will be leading the interview. Bren is a Journey Clinical CAP provider based in Virginia who I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the past few months and has really taken a leadership role in helping you all access information through her relationship with people like Kristen. And so I really appreciate you, Bren, for helping us get this conversation going. And this is the first of hopefully more educational resources that we can share with you all. So thank you all for joining. And I'm going to hand it over. Bren's going to be conducting and hosting with Kristen today. And then we will hopefully have some time for a Q&A at the end. So you can pop your questions into the chat and we will address those at the end and facilitate. I'll help facilitate that. So I'll hand it over to you, Bren, and everyone let me know if you need anything throughout the call.
Awesome. Thanks, Lizzie. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Bren Seed. I've been with Journey Clinical for, I think, a couple years now. And I'm an art therapist, LPC, and have been loving doing the ketamine assisted psychotherapy work. If you want to reach out to me, I'm at ebbandflowtherapy.com. I don't remember where I came across this short webinar. I had thought it was Journey Clinical and it wasn't. I think somebody had posted about it. And I logged in and it was Brian Hubbard and a doctor from Brazil, who I don't remember who that was. Maybe somebody here will remember that, and to talk about Ibogaine. And I was fascinated and went to try to find out more. And I signed up for the newsletter with Americans for Ibogaine. And then maybe a week later, I got this email from Kristen saying, "Would you like to connect, have a discovery call?" I was surprised and pleased. And we got on a call, and I thought I would just be talking to someone who works for a nonprofit, and she does. But I was struck by this unique experience Kristen has had with the medicine and her journey working with the organization. And it's an incredible story. And we ended up having multiple conversations and getting to know each other. And I was trying to think of how I could support the efforts. And we both agreed it would be fun and interesting to bring the conversation we were having to others. And Journey Clinical offered to host. So what I would love to do is ask you, Kristen, to please tell us a little bit about how you got where you are. I think you might begin with a couple slides about what the heck Ibogaine is, and then we can get into your story. But that's what I'm excited to have Kristen share, is her story. It's very unique and I think helpful to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm going to just share a couple of things because Ibogaine is not part of our cultural vernacular. It's, a lot of people have heard of other psychedelic assisted therapies. We've heard of, LSD, MDMA, psilocybin. Like, I can never say that right, by the way. And but a lot of people haven't heard about ibogaine because even though it's culturally ancient, it's been being used in West Africa for thousands of years. It really hasn't become part of our conversation in the United States until kind of recently. It made an appearance in the 60s and 70s, and then it was classified as a Schedule One drug along with multiple other psychedelics. And since then, because you can't even legally test it in the United States, you can't possess it, you can't import it, you can't manufacture it. All of that is, completely illegal right now. It's just really not been part of the conversation. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what ibogaine is, and ibogaine comes from an iboga plant. The plant is called iboga. It comes from the root of the plant. It's a plant that's a native to Central and West Africa. A big area for that is called Gabon, Gabon. I had not heard of that area until I came to be familiar with this. And the root bark contains ibogaine. It's naturally occurring, it's psychoactive. An interesting fact about it is the plant actually takes 10 years to mature. And so, as we move through this conversation and begin to bring it into the United States, part of the conversation is, sustainability, synthesis, and some other things. How do we make this available at scale? And so it's been used for centuries by the Bwiti people. And so if you become kind of interested in Iboga and Ibogaine, you'll hear that kind of come up. It's a Bwiti tribal tradition used by indigenous people. And it's been really important for Americans for Ibogaine to do things correctly and have established strong partnerships with both the government of Gabon as well as indigenous leaders, have made multiple trips, have spent lots of time, and have established a beautiful partnership. And so, Western scientists isolated ibogaine in 1901, and it wasn't really recognized until the 60s for its potential to interrupt addiction. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. And it's really exciting for the different things that it is applicable to, because it's applicable to several different things in a really powerful way. So the first thing is that it provides a neurological reset. So something I know that you all will appreciate is that our reward systems become impacted through many different things: addiction, trauma, just things that happen to us. And ibogaine interacts with serotonin, dopamine, glutamate pathways, and it resets those neural circuits. So, whereas an individual who is addicted to opioids, perhaps, say they stop cold turkey, it's going to take them 12 to 18 months for their rewards pathways to come back online. With Ibogaine treatment, that can happen in as little as 36 to 48 hours. So before they've ever left their treatment facility, their reward systems are firing again. And the effect is the same no matter how long and how serious the drug abuse has been. Have you used it one time? Have you used it 1,000 times? It will actually reset those neural pathways and create that reward system functioning again. And that's really what provides the bang for your buck, so to speak, in addiction and withdrawal interruption, because opioid withdrawal symptom is really the reason why so few people, like 25% traditional rehabilitation methods, are successful long term. This is more like 80 to 90% with a single treatment, and upwards over 90% with two treatments. Lots of people, when they seek ibogaine treatment, have a single treatment, and then they move on and they never have another treatment again. Some people have two, some people may have three. It just depends on kind of the layers of the onion, right? Like how many layers are on your onion. So another thing that you'll really appreciate is the neuroplasticity. So whereas with some other plant medicines, you see that neuroplasticity window, like that area where your mind is very open and, kind of malleable and able to create new patterns and create new thoughts and to do that work. The neuroplasticity window is up to 120 days with ibogaine. So you actually get several months of time. So if you're thinking of somebody who has experienced, extreme trauma, addictions, where their life patterns have been formed around that addiction, where everything that they're doing is feeding into that addiction, you've got like 3 months to help them establish new patterns to integrate, during that integration period. So there's the preparation window going into treatment where you really want to help people understand what they want out of the treatment, get the right mindset around it. It's all about set and setting, have the treatment. And then on the back end of that, creating structure around integrating in that neuroplasticity window, because it's a huge window. It's higher, exponentially than anything else we're aware of. And then the psychological processing aspect of it, Ibogaine induces a dreamlike state. So your heart rate slows way down, which is why it requires medical supervision. This won't be ever something that you're administering in a home office. You're going to be, when I had my treatment, hooked up to medical monitoring and an IV the entire time, because it does slow the QT rate down. Also, why drug screening and all these things are really important. People need to be off of, you know, any drugs, either prescribed or not, even supplements and things. We were told, no supplements, don't put anything in your body but clean, unprocessed food and water for a week before you come. And that psychological processing, I kind of joke with people, when you hear psychedelic, I'm like, it's not purple elephants on the ceilings. It's not that kind of psychedelic effect. It, to me, and to a lot of other people, feels like being able to set your ego and the things that typically drive your decisions aside and to interact with your subconscious level very easily. Like it's a very yeah, it's a dream-like state, but it didn't induce like, what I would call like hallucinations, in that you see visuals when your eyes are closed, but you can simply open your eyes at any point during the treatment. For example, the treatment window, so when you have a flood dose of Ibogaine, lasts maybe 10, 11, 12 hours. And during that time frame, you're hooked up to an IV. They're pushing fluids. You're going to have to go to the bathroom. So like when it's time to go to the bathroom, you just raise your hand and they come and they unhook you. You take off your mask, you take off your headphones. You walk slowly. There's ataxia where you kind of feel like you're walking in water, but they help you to the bathroom and help you back. So you're fully grounded in reality the entire time. And I think that that's one thing that helps people kind of come to say yes to this treatment, is that you kind of have this like escape hatch where if anything is ever too big, too scary, something you just can't confront, which I don't recommend, something if it comes up, you want to lean in. But there is that escape hatch if you need to pull it, although, most people don't. And a very common report from people who've experienced this treatment is the ability to have this objective observer review of your life. So, whereas when things happen in our lives and we see them from the inside looking out and we interpret that through the lens of experience and our own, everything else, you get to look at those things from the outside looking in. And that objective observer experience allows you to reframe. And as therapists, I know y'all can appreciate that's a lot of, one of the goals of therapeutic relationships is to address traumatic incidents that have happened, reframe them. But sometimes your ego really gets in the way of that. So if you can kind of put your ego in timeout and then address your subconscious on a more pure level, people really find lasting behavioral change through the combination of that reframing and the actual psychological effect of the reward systems coming back online and performing that way. Oh, whoop. So, just talking about why we're talking about this now. Obviously, veteran suicide rates are high. Opioid relapse rates are incredibly high. We don't have effective treatments for this. And then also one thing I didn't mention is there is a measurable physiological improvement on the structure of the brain after Ibogaine treatment. It is effective at treating TBIs. The way I became involved in this organization is through former Texas Governor Rick Perry. And he did his own treatment because he became familiar with it and he was really wanting to help, he not just familiar with it, he had seen it completely change the lives of a couple people that he truly cares about. And he wanted to get on board and throw his weight behind it, but he didn't want to like promote something he hadn't done himself. Well, he'll tell you that he hasn't had a very traumatic life. He's had, a stressful life as, serving as the governor in politics and all those kinds of things, but that doesn't necessarily relate to trauma. And he was really, really impressed by what was happening in the lives of veterans who were seeking treatments overseas and, in Mexico. So he went to his neurologist. He's had 3 major concussive events in his life and had a brain scan done. And his neurologist was, kind of called it. He's like, I'm not going to stop you from doing whatever you want. I don't think it's going to hurt you, but was very skeptical, very skeptical. And so Governor Perry went and had the treatment. He had a profound spiritual journey. And then he went back to his doctor, and a single week after his treatment, he had 27% more activity in his prefrontal cortex. And then 6 weeks after his treatment, the neurologist was completely astounded. And he said, "Your brain looks like the brain of a 40-year-old." And he was 73 at the time. And now the neurologist like testifies in front of Congress and all those kinds of things for us. So um, I just wanted to kind of go over that, like those stats with you, because it's one of the most powerful molecules on the planet. And I'm going to stop sharing and just kind of have a quick conversation about me and how I ended up in this role, because that's kind of interesting as well. And it all has to do with, Governor Perry. So going back to 2007, my husband was serving with our military in Iraq, and he had really been through a lot. He had been through a lot in his childhood, just a lot of childhood. His father was extremely abusive, and he went into the military directly out of high school. He served in Bosnia and a couple other places, and then he left military service. We got married, and then he went back in. And so 2007, he was serving in Baghdad, Iraq on what was called a quick reaction team, which was a team that was like the 911 if you're in a combat zone. So he went out on a call one day, his whole team did, and they ended up in just a political nightmare. It's a really long story, but there was conflict going on between the United States government and the Iraqi government about something called the Status of Forces Agreement. And they were arguing about who had jurisdiction over civilians in Iraq. And my husband was actually a civilian. The team that he was on was supporting the Department of State. So they weren't there with the Department of Defense, which is military. And anybody who wasn't with the military, whether they be security contractors, mail contractors, food contractors, construction contractors, all those people were United States citizens. And the Iraqi government was saying, well, we need jurisdiction over those people in our country. And so this firefight happens. They go out one day to respond to a USAID diplomat who had been bombed on venue, and they needed to, basically stop traffic in a route so this diplomat could get back to the green zone or the international zone. And when that happened, they were recipients of a secondary attack. Very common. It was very textbook then. So there was a first attack, and then there was a second attack on the responders, which was kind of like normal operating procedures. Well, things went a little sideways, because when the Iraqi police colonel arrived on the scene, he calls up his partner at the army and he says, "Hey, we've got an incident. You'll want to, send your people out." He says, "Oh, well, it's not my guys. It must be, these contractors." And they were like, "Opportunity." So they set to work literally gathering pillowcases of bullet casings, like any bullet casings, and cleansing the scene. And they were like, they just rolled up in here and shot the place up for no reason and made these accusations that were, just wildly, wildly untrue, because they needed to create a situation that they could then take jurisdiction of. It was just like crazy politics, right? So they get cleared by the Department of State multiple times. That wasn't working out politically. So they actually brought the FBI into Iraq weeks after. They didn't preserve the scene. They didn't preserve the vehicles. All of them were just, repaired and sent back into use. And it turned into indictments, which were then completely dismissed. So my husband goes from an abusive childhood to the military to combat to this legal case that is like, feels like your own government has turned against you. And it gets completely dismissed by a federal judge. So we move on with our lives. And then, like, nearly 7 years after this happened in 2014, superseding indictments came. And him and several of his other teammates went to trial in Washington, D.C., in front of a civilian jury 7 years after the fact. And, not to get political, but when things get difficult and politics are involved, the government doesn't always play by the rules. If you're familiar with our justice system, things don't always go, justice isn't always blind. And so they were all convicted, 4 people, including my husband. 3 of them got 30 years and a day, and then one of them got life in prison. I mean, even though it was demonstrably untrue that they had done these things that they had been accused of. So I set out while he was in prison to figure out how to achieve presidential pardons. And it took me 6 years, but they were all 4 of them pardoned presidentially and released from prison after serving 6 years, though, in a variety of medium and high security prisons, which are, just some of the most violent places on earth. And from, just compounding trauma when he came home, I think a lot of people looked at that situation like, oh, you won, happy ending, everything's good now. But truly, like, I went from the frying pan into the fire because the things that were happening that were so ugly and difficult were happening outside of my home. And then when he came home, like, we had been apart for 6 years. He'd missed almost 6.5 years of our daughter's life. She was 1.5 when he went to prison and 8 when he came home. And so we had to learn to parent together while he's deeply, deeply traumatized, and we had totally different upbringings. And so it was really difficult. He came home with a lot of darkness, a lot of trauma, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness. And when the people who wronged you are completely inaccessible, like, you had to just take it off on the people around you, right? Like the people that you have access to. And, and he's not yelling at me about this court case. Like, he's screaming at me because I didn't pre-rinse the dishes. And I'm like, okay, this is crazy. These are dishes. And so we were finding ourselves in these patterns of just like this behavior that under other circumstances I would never tolerate. And and due to that, like, we really struggled. And so, fast forward a few years, and we really, really hit rock bottom. We moved to Florida and began just kind of our own spiritual journeys and began healing ourselves and going to the beach. We stopped doing anything that had to do with anything. It was work, school, cry, pray, sleep, eat, argue, whatever we needed to do. And we found ourselves at the end of the 2 years, like, honestly, a lot better, deeply improved, functioning better. But there were things that we just couldn't think our way out of. And as a result of that, we started looking at different psychedelic therapies. Some friends had suggested ayahuasca, and I had looked into that, but I was concerned about the fact that most of the ayahuasca ceremonies that I was familiar with were like, in the jungle in Peru, you know what I mean? And that didn't align very well with things that I was comfortable with as somebody who's just kind of grown up in Western society. And so we moved back to Texas around the time the book was published. There was a book published by HarperCollins in the summer of last year, so about a year ago. And we gave a copy of that book to former Texas Governor Perry at an event we were at, of all things. We just gave him a signed copy because, we both grew up in Texas, both, we're familiar with him and think he's a pretty good guy. And he contacted us a week later and he said, I'm outraged. I read the entire book. I'm so sad about what happened. I'm outraged that I didn't know that this was happening to Texans and that I didn't get involved. So, but I think I have something that can help you now. Have you ever heard of Ibogaine? And so he spent a lot of time, like his own personal time, talking to me, talking to my husband, and walking us through that, and walking us through Ibogaine, and talking about the physiological effects, the spiritual effects, the mental and emotional effects, talked about his own journey, and offered to sponsor us both, which I took advantage of. And I went the first week of February, so just a few months ago, and received an Ibogaine treatment. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. And my husband actually goes on June 1st because he was enrolled in school and he couldn't bail out of school for a week. And then through that process, got to know Governor Perry, and he invited me part of the Americans for Ibogaine team, which was kind of the long way to get back to my introduction, which is, I'm Christin Slough and I'm with Americans for Ibogaine. I'm the development director, and I've been with the organization since about December. And the whole organization is less than a year old. The birthday is at the end of June next month. So this is all, like Bren said, like, we are just very passionate. It's an incredibly small team. When you send an email, it goes to a real human. We're going to call you up and have a conversation. This isn't, some giant machine, that's been around for a long time. It's just truly like Governor Perry, a guy named Marcus Luttrell, if you're familiar with Lone Survivor, a couple of their board members, and a few other staff, including Brian Hubbard, which is the CEO. He's an incredible person, former Kentucky Attorney General, and some other things. And it's just really just us, like, picking up the phones and calling and emailing and getting on airplanes and going to do things with people. So I'll pause there and ask you, Bren. I know that we want to save some time to talk about the actual journey itself, because I went to a treatment center in Mexico called Beyond, and I spent a week there with a veteran spouse cohort who have also been with spouses that were, that had vicarious trauma through what their husbands had been through, and then the situations that they encountered in their homes as a result. So wanted to see if there's anything we wanted to clarify or talk about before we jump into that.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. That's good background. Yeah, I'm thinking about questions I had for you in our conversations, and I was just very curious about your experience with Ibogaine, and I was also curious about why you went first, and you explained about school, but what
Yeah.
was the choices around going at different times, and very curious, and I'm sure a lot of journey clinical therapists would say the same thing. What was the preparation and what was the integration like? Um, and how was that facilitated? What kind of support did you get?
Yeah, so let me start with why we ended up going at different times. One was the schooling thing, but it was interesting because when the governor offered to do have us both go, my first thought was we should go at the same time because our marriage was really fractured, and I thought we'll go through this healing journey and we'll work all this stuff out together. And then when I started talking to the people who actually run the program, they were like, we actually don't recommend that. That's actually very common for people who want to seek treatment and their spouse wants to seek treatment as well, that we think like we're going to go do this at the same time. It was like, but your journey is your journey, and your journey through life is your journey through life no matter who you're married to. And they really suggest that you make your journey about you, and that your spouse be at home to be what they call your home-based healing partner, and that they are there to support you at home, run the house, and that you've got you going through a journey and them supporting you, and then flip-flopping versus like you both being raw emotionally. And then you can actually kind of give up part of your journey, especially as women and your caregivers. We tend to emotionally regulate our partners, and so we tend to stuff things down or not discuss things as fully as we would if you're both going through it at the same time. So I appreciated that. I was like, okay, so regardless of the timing, we need to not be doing it at the same time. And so he did end up having his pushed out until the end of his school term because he was in school and it just wasn't going to work to just drop everything and be gone for a week. And so I ended up going first and really going through that entire, like we talked about, that neuroplasticity window before he went on his own. And so my journey has really just gotten to be about me, and as a wife and a mother and as somebody who's been through everything that we had with that, with all of the things going on. Not a lot has been about Christin. So this was definitely a time where I made space for myself and got to be very honest about what I was going through, and then also kind of pave that way to helping him through his journey, which is upcoming, and like really understanding it. So that way, now that I get to be his support system while he's gone, I'm not still raw and still working through my own stuff, but B, have a great perspective on what that journey looks like from a practical, like experiential way instead of just like a theoretical way. So I had the privilege of being included in a veteran spouse program at Beyond. And Beyond is a beautiful facility. It's kind of very med spa feeling. It's a really lovely place in Cancun. And they run through their nonprofit. They do veteran cohorts with 6 veterans at a time, and then they do veteran spouse cohorts with 6 women at the time, and then they do female veterans as well. And then I don't know that they've had any cohorts of male veteran spouses yet. But when we went through their main program, if you're just going in as an individual to their main program, they do have preparation work and integration work one-on-one with a coach. But what I really appreciated about this program was because I went through with a cohort of 5 other women, the 6 of us met on Zoom and we did group coaching for 4 weeks before we ever went to Mexico for our treatment. So we talked about, I mean, in depth, what treatment looks like, got all of our nerves out about it. And it was interesting because everybody that I went through the cohort with, all of their spouses had already been through. So they were so excited. I mean, in tears, they were so excited about receiving this treatment. It really helped me get over my own nerves because I had, no experience, and neither had my husband. So they spent 4 weeks with us, on Zoom. We got to know each other, and we got to really, I kind of, break it up there with like AA. It's like what happens in this room stays in this room. What we talk about in this room is just between us. It's very confidential. And so we got a chance to really get to know each other before we went to Mexico. And then we did our treatments over those 7 days together. And then on the back end, 4 weeks of group coaching as well. as an additional layer to that, included, you have two one-to-one coaching sessions, hour long with your coach. Our coaches were there on site the entire time we were there, and we could grab them at any moment, that we needed to have a conversation, as well as our facilitators. We had two amazing veteran spouse facilitators who are our mother ducks, and they mother ducked us the whole time. And then on the back end, you have another couple coaching sessions, but for a very reasonable amount of money. I think it was like maybe $50 or $75. You could have as many individual coaching sessions as you wanted to sign up for and that their schedules would allow. So I would say that that is probably one of the more robust preparation and integration programs that are out there. And I would challenge us all, as we are looking at bringing this in the United States, to consider that the minimum. Understanding that that neuroplasticity window is up to 12 weeks, especially for people who are dealing with some really strong patterns around addictive behaviors and things like that. I think there's a real opportunity to do more. On the back end, I think 4 weeks of preparation is probably more than enough. And a lot of people who are in crisis don't have that. Some people who are in crisis, they contact the facility, they're there a week later. That's okay. It's great to have that preparation, but sometimes people in crisis just don't have that opportunity. But on the back end, I think that's a real place to like lean in, and where we're going to see a lot of opportunity for psychedelic assisted therapists to be a part of that journey for people, whether it be inpatient or outpatient, virtual or in person, depending on, just the variety and complexity of all the different cases out there.
Great. Um, well, it seems like, how are we on time? Is it a good time to switch to a little bit more of like what you're referring to, like what's going on with the organization, what are their efforts, and how do therapists support and be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a quick moment and just talk about like maybe 4 or 5 minutes about my experience on site with the program.
Right.
One thing that's really important for people to understand is that your heart rate slows way down during this process. And so it's really important that people not be trying to do Ibogaine on their own, and not under medical supervision. So when I arrived at the facility, they did an EKG immediately. They did a blood analysis. They did a urinalysis. They do deal with a lot of people who are struggling with addiction. And so you self-report whether you've taken anything, but then they also, trust but validate, right? To make sure that they're not going to walk into a situation where a patient is unsafe. And it's certainly not from a judgmental point of view. It's just from a pure safety perspective. I had probably 6 EKGs during the time that I was there. I felt incredibly safe, incredibly watched over. I did my flood dose overnight. So I arrived on Saturday, and then on Sunday night, we did, from basically 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. was when I was in my flood dose. And like I said, we were hooked up to an IV. They were co-administrating magnesium, which supports you during that process. And they also provided Zofran. So if you, felt nauseous, some people find that distracting. There is some, kind of pushback in the community around, you should be purging, you should allow that to happen. They leave it up to the patient. And so I hadn't really come across anybody who said, oh, you should purge, you should allow that, kind of nauseous thing to happen. So I just raised my hand and was like, yes, I'd like some Zofran, please. And they pushed me a little Zofran. And for me, I think that was the right thing to do, because I was able to focus on what was happening in my journey and, close my eyes and sink into it. And I honestly spent probably 2/3 of my journey grieving. It's not something I had ever done. I'm strong and I don't cry, and I'm not that kind of person, and I stuff everything down. And when I had grieved for my daughter's experience. I grieved for my husband's experience. I had never really grieved for myself, and I'd never really allowed myself that opportunity. And so I really had that objective observer where I got to look at my life and just grieve and be sad and just let it out. It's funny because I caught myself, because you're in a room. There was 3 of us who were doing our flood dose at the same time. It kind of looks like a hospital room, kind of semi-private with the little drapes in between, but they've got cozy blankets and nice lighting, good music and incense and stuff. So they really try to soften it and make it conducive to that journey. But I started to feel myself wanting to cry, and then I didn't want to make people uncomfortable. I was imagining, this guy, he's over there and he's like charting and he's like doing things, and I'm just over here crying in the background. And so I tried to like stop myself. And then I just remember having this thought, and I'm like, Christin, you flew to Mexico and you shoved a handful of psychedelics in your safe. If there was a time to cry, it's now. So I just decided to let it go, and honestly ended up going through that grieving process and taking 15 years of hardship and just kind of grieving it out. And I tell people all the time that it felt like 10 years of therapy in 10 hours, because instead of having that, that therapeutic talk therapy relationship where you go, you discuss a situation, you reframe it, you talk about how you thought about it before and how you're thinking about it now, it's like ripping the band off, baby. It's like, you just go through a whole lot of it all at once. And instead of doing it in those 1 hour markers once a week and then kind of ruminating throughout the week and feeling upheaved, there's just this arc, this whole journey. And then after that grieving process, the last third, it was really interesting because they say that the medicine gives you what you need, not what you want. But there was an arc to it, and so there was this whole grieving journey. And then my visuals became more about the future and more about just things that were like very peaceful and very loving. And one quick example of that is I do visualization techniques, and so I had learned to calm myself. My place that I go is on a boat in the middle of the ocean where you can't see any land around, and I find that very peaceful. I'm sitting on the edge, and my legs are dangling over the side, and I could hear my daughter in the kitchen behind me tinkering around. She's always in there making something. And I had a man on the boat with me, but I couldn't ever imagine it to be my husband during that time because he was like, kind of the source of a lot of my pain. And it's hard to visualize a peaceful place with the person who's causing you pain, right? So I had not been visualizing with him. And my very final visual that I remember from that journey is the only immersive one I had. Most of mine kind of felt like they were on a TV screen, like literally like a TV screen, kind of in this old green, kind of grainy cast. They weren't even full color. But the only like fully immersive where I felt like I was in it visual was this visual. And I was on the boat and I had this glorious smile on my face. And I'm running towards somebody and I looked down and it was my husband. And it was overwhelming. And I can't even talk about it still without being an emotional thing because it wasn't a like a command like this is your life and this is the future and this is what's going to happen, but it was a release of all the resentment and anger and things that I hadn't been able to process previously. And so it was such a beautiful end cap. Like there was a real arc to that journey that was extremely meaningful to me and was very much rooted in my subconscious. So, and then you kind of like start to wake up, and once your heart rate returns to normal, they let you kind of go back to your room. Our group was in this like beautiful casita with this lovely backyard. But I mean, I was very much mentally kind of still in the medicine, even though my heart rate had returned to normal. And so we went back and I just kind of like laid on the couches with one of the other girls that I went through my treatment with. And we just talked and we cried and we laughed and we just processed out loud together. I would say that I felt pretty much in the medicine till about 9 p.m. the next day, probably about the full 24 hours. I slept, probably about 6 hours that night and then woke up the next day feeling pretty, pretty back to normal physiologically. But there's this period of afterglow that kind of, fades over that 90 days where, even after I returned home, it was pretty sparkly there for the first couple of weeks after I returned back from Mexico from my treatment. Just, it was like they call it the afterglow effect. And it's just a really beautiful, peaceful time and a really great time to inspect within yourself old patterns and old thought patterns and behaviors and make changes with intentionality, which is where that integration coaching and accountability and having partners where we're all on WhatsApp and we're like, did you not do any nicotine today? Have we all stayed off alcohol today? Did we all, meet our goals for exercise today? And like those things that we wanted to do together that we had set as our own imperatives. And so it was like beautiful having that, the coaching sessions, but also in between we had a WhatsApp chat, an accountability chat where we were all talking to each other through, what we wanted to maintain through that period. So it was really a really meaningful time and really, and still we'll be friends with those girls to the end of time. They're wonderful. So I will like, shall we change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about AFI and legislation and policy and all the nerdy things. So now we're like, okay, that sounds incredible, right? Like, how do we make this available to people without, spending $10,000 to $15,000 for a week in Mexico? That's really not accessible for a lot of folks. All right, let me launch this again and hit the presentation button. Okay, so why are we talking about this now? I know I hit on this a lot that we just have honestly, what Brian Hubbard calls an epidemic of human suffering. While a lot of our policy work and legislative work is focused on veterans, it's because, like, if you go in to a legislator and you tell them 15 different things that this can do and 50 different populations that it can serve, it's kind of confuse them and lose them, to be really honest with you. It's a lot. And so, by framing legislation around a population of individuals who we know are suffering, we know are dying, and that they really encompass a lot of these different things. So, a lot of our veterans, they end up being physically and morally injured. During their physical injuries, they're administered opioids. They become addicted to opioids. They get, released from the military either because they have ended their term or because they've had a medical discharge. And there's this downward spiral of trauma, addiction, TBIs, and opioid and alcohol numbing and masking and all of those things. So it's a population that represents very well addiction, TBI, and trauma. And it's a population of people that our country owes a debt of gratitude to. And so there is a lot of conversation around veterans and PTSD, but there isn't a complete and full recognition that most people experience some kind of trauma in their lives. By the time you've hit about 40 or 50 or wherever, like much people much earlier in their lives, you've been through something that this could probably help you with. People who have survived sexual assaults, people who are, addicted to opioids for any number of different reasons, alcohol, numbing, childhood abuse, like all these things come up. And so it is not that anybody who is promoting these efforts doesn't recognize or doesn't find any of those populations as important. It's just a simplified messaging, and it's more simple to go at it from this direction because it's a very representative population, and it's a population that, from a legislative perspective, is bipartisan and simple to focus on. So right now, as I mentioned, it's Schedule 1. It's completely illegal to even test it. You can't possess it. You can't import it. You can't synthesize it. And that is really like step 1 of this work that we're doing. Oops, let me just click here. There we go. So there's a few different things that are happening right now. So the first is state legislation. So what we have to do is build the FDA trials. The FDA requires you to have a demographic and geographically diverse population. So very incredible work in Texas. Texas passed $100 million to fund specifically Ibogaine research. That's about a third of what we probably need. We need probably about $300 million to get through FDA trials through phase 1, 2, and 3 FDA trials. So Texas already kicked in a third, but Texas could not do it on their own because you have to have multiple sites, you have to have multiple states, multiple demographics, like all of those things. And so one of the main priorities of Americans for Ibogaine right now is developing a multi-state coalition so that we've got enough states and enough sites and enough data coming together to navigate that trial process. And we are having a lot of success. There are 15 different states that have active legislation right now. Texas has already passed, Oklahoma has passed, Arizona passed. I think maybe West Virginia, Kentucky. I mean, there are just a lot of states who are seeing momentum. And so the legislation is really the bulk of what we're doing right now, because it is wild. So during a legislative session, you might have 5 or 6 different hearings before something actually gets passed. So you have subcommittees, you have committees, you have hearings in front of the full House, in front of the Senate, and then you have a governor who's either going to veto or sign. And so all of those conversations have to happen. And we found that there's a kind of a magic formula here where you need 3 witnesses. You need a policy expert, you need a medical expert, and then you need somebody with a compelling personal testimony, which oftentimes for us is our veterans. That's that veteran focus. So if you think about that, it's like we've got to travel 18 people to every single state that is processing this legislation, and it just takes time and money, and also ambassadors. You'll see on the bottom right of the screen over here, we have about 30 ambassadors now. We're very careful. We will not work with anybody in that platform or that way during their first 90 days after treatment, because everybody comes out in day 1 of their treatment. They're like, I want to talk about this. Everybody needs this. But you're raw. And so what we don't want to do is put anybody on a platform and then allow other people's opinions and voices to impact their experience, because there are going to be people who are going to push back against psychedelic therapies. There are going to be people who try to invalidate what your experience was because they just have some kind of knee-jerk cultural reaction against it. There's a million different things. And so we're really careful with our ambassadors to ensure that everybody's at least 90 days out for treatment, that they've really gotten through that period of time, that they're really solid in their experience, and that they're not going to be shaken by going in front of, the public and allowing the public into their experience. So, The other work is at the federal level, which has been an amazing journey. The president signed an executive order just a few weeks back to expedite the review of psychedelic assisted therapies, not just Ibogaine. It really was focused on a couple, and it instructs the FDA to prioritize it for review. What it did not do was reschedule it. If the FDA and the DEA and the DOJ cannot come together for rescheduling in the next few months, we'll probably try to use that pathway to the president again and try to get an executive order to actually do the rescheduling itself. But, politics and all of those things, you want to follow the normal pathway. So what it did was prioritize that. And so that's that federal pathway where you've got to work with the FDA, the DEA, the DOJ, all the three-letter organizations, because it's just fully legal right now. And then the other thing that he directed the Veterans Affairs, the VA, to do underneath the Department of Defense is to partner and to be part of that and to allow experiments to happen and trials to happen with our veterans who are clamoring for these treatments. And then the other piece of that is the international partnerships. Um, we just had a conversation yesterday with people who started like Germany for Ibogaine, and you can't call it UK for Ibogaine. We've learned that it has to be like Wales for Ibogaine, like all the different countries, they want to be recognized separately. But international partnerships are forming, and we also co-hosted the first international um, Ibogaine Summit in Gabon earlier this year in January, because indigenous sensitivity, cultural sensitivity, sustainability of the plant, of the region, collaboration is super, super important. The thing that has happened now is like the train has left the station, and we really believe that Ibogaine is coming to the United States, and that the moment now is determined, does it get done right? Does the therapeutic framework happen? Does the sensitivity and sustainability happen? Like, does all of this happen in a way that we feel really good about? And that's really what AFI has been developed to do. We don't receive any money from the government. We're not an NGO. We are fully funded by individual philanthropy. We don't even have any corporate partners right now. It's just all individual philanthropy right now. So here's just a quick recap of some of the states that I mentioned earlier. So Texas really led the way, $100 million towards research. The federal government said 50 million, but that's for multiple psychedelics. Mississippi, Arizona, Indiana, Colorado, Oklahoma. And then we've got a lot more that are still working through their legislative sessions this year that haven't wrapped for the year. But a lot of those didn't include any funding. But sometimes with legislation, you're just kind of learning the politics game, that sometimes you just want to get your piece passed and then you come back the next session and try to get the funding passed. And so that's really been what we've seen in most areas, is that we've just got to get the legislation passed, and then next year we'll back at it again looking for those dollars to get to that about $300 million that we're going to need to get through all three phases of the FDA trials. And then in the meantime, working that parallel path of getting the right pieces in place so that we can do it legally and, have that actual medicine. So I did want to take a second because there was a lot of confusion around the executive order. I'm in some Facebook communities around Iboga and Ibogaine and psychedelics and things like that. And the day of, the day after, people are like, "Oh my gosh, I am so excited! That it's legal now." And I'm like, "Whoa!" So whoa! But what it does is it directed the FDA to fast track the review of the qualifying psychedelics, including Ibogaine, and it's called breakthrough therapies. It allocated $50 million from the federal government to help out. That's not just for Ibogaine, that's for all of the ones that were in the breakthrough therapy executive order. It ordered the FDA and the DEA to create an access pathway for eligible patients to access the investigational compounds, and directs the Human and Health Services and FDA to partner with the VA to expand the clinical trial participation. Interestingly enough, not only did we just pass in Oklahoma, but all 5 major tribes in Oklahoma, like Chickasha and Cherokee and Seminole, they all unanimously agreed to participate as well. Their entire council, hands down, unanimously, they really see the value of this. And so they're going to also be running trial sites as well alongside us, which we thought was really like a powerful thing. And then it requires the AG to initiate the scheduling reviews. on completion of the phase 3 trials. So it doesn't sadly reschedule the Ibogaine. It's still Schedule 1. And so we're still, got to push there. It does not approve Ibogaine for medical use. So, that happens at like a Schedule 2, a Schedule 3, things like that. It doesn't authorize anybody to receive treatment in the United States. It doesn't replace any of the standards that we're, hoping to achieve. And it's an executive order, so it can accelerate, but it can't bypass the scientific process. And we don't want that. We don't support legislation that is focused on decriminalization. We don't think that that's the right pathway. We want medical supervision. We want people to be safe. We want there to be a strong therapeutic, framework. We don't want people, just off on their own dealing with this extremely powerful molecule without people like you. People like you are really important to this process. And so that's why we're so focused on getting it done the right way. And again, just about no shortcuts. So medical safety, therapeutic structure, indigenous respect, and then standards and certification. So, in the future, we don't hope to see like the American Academy of Pediatrics, right? Like this needs to have certification, it needs to have training, it needs to have all of the framework that you all have. So that way, people are receiving this treatment in a way that optimizes it for them. And so that they are able to really maximize the treatment benefit. I actually have a personal friend of mine, somebody that really, actually, it's one of my husband's friends that also went to prison, and he had Ibogaine treatment. He had no preparation, he had no integration. He just went down to Mexico and had the treatment done. And his outcome was completely different from mine because it just was totally framed differently. He has not touched a drop of alcohol since. He's off all of his prescription medications. So physiologically, it did everything that we know that the medicine can do. But on a psychological and spiritual level, because he wasn't expecting, like he didn't know what to expect during his journey, that he was going to be confronted with these challenging parts of his life, it was miserable for him because nobody told him like, hey, this is an opportunity to reframe, to heal, to lean into difficult situations instead of fighting them off. And so because he said, I don't regret doing it, but I would never do it again because that framework wasn't in place for him. It was a much different experience for him on like a psychological and spiritual and emotional level, but the physiological effects are profound. He had been on psychotropic medication, drinking heavily. He owns a liquor store, like literally owns a liquor store. And so there's not, a possibility for him to just remove alcohol from his presence, but he has not touched a drop of alcohol in, 6 months since he had this treatment. And it's a lasting effect. And he said it's not even hard. Like it's not difficult for him. He's not, reaching for something every day and having to fight himself off. He just doesn't want it anymore. Same thing with nicotine. He's off nicotine too. I was like, are you serious? He's dipped for 30 years, which was really amazing. So I did want to just point out that just even in my own personal sphere, I know people who, myself, who I felt like got pretty good preparation and integration versus my partner who didn't, my friend. And it was a much different experience for him, even though the physiological effects were profound. And so just real quickly, the vision, I'm so sorry, we talked a little too long, but I'll stay on as long as y'all want to do if y'all have questions. But we've had 2 annual American Ibogaine meetings, pulling everybody together, building that legislative momentum. The Texas Consortium is on track to launch trials here in Texas. We've just got to get that last piece with the legality sorted so that we can legally source the medicine. And we've had many legislative wins this year. Over the next few years, we're hoping obviously to hit phase 2 and phase 3 as well. Start working on through practitioner training, certification, putting standards in place, and really important to make it completely medicalized, available through the VA, available through insurance. Right now you just have to pay out of pocket and go to Mexico, and we want to make it both accessible and affordable for anybody who needs treatment. We see a day when, people who are unhoused, people who have, suffered through trafficking, that people can regain their dignity and their integrity through this process of, spiritual healing. And then, within the next 10 years, we want to see it fully FDA approved, fully medicalized, fully covered, delivered by trained, certified clinical teams, and where Americans don't have to leave the country for hopeful therapeutics. So we meant to leave 10 minutes for questions. We've got 5, but I can stay on. I don't have a hard stop if y'all don't. And I just wanted to pause there and let Bren, if you have questions or if we want to queue up any from the chat.
Yeah,
I see
Lizzie,
a
do
lot of
you
words.
see? Are there a lot of, yeah, we have some questions, Lizzie? To,
Yeah, we just got one from wonderful Juanita, who is an art therapist based in Brooklyn, New York, and uh, a very active member of the journey clinical community and growing that here in New York City. So, Juanita, you can feel free to take the mic if you like.
Yeah, I'd love to know about how therapists are can contribute to this advocacy, helping with trials or anything with the political aspect, and also love to hear from Lizzie if Journey Clinical will also help support us in that.
So from Americans for Ibogaine perspective, we would love for y'all to jump into our website, americansforibogaine.org, and just sign up to grab newsletters from us. It helps us to see, and you can just literally send an email either to like donate, which just comes to me, or my name is Christin, Christin, at americansforibogaine.org, and say, I'd like to raise my hand, and this is what state I'm in, and I want to help out because we actually have just like a master list by state. And there may be times when we're going to reach out and say, whatever state that you're in, okay, New York, you're up. Our legislation is going in this session. We need people to contact these particular senators, these particular congressmen. So if you will honestly just send me an email, we are so small. We're just like actual human beings. We will add you to those rolls of people in those states. If any of you have experience with Ibogaine, um, if you've traveled, we actually have some people. We have a woman on our staff who is the medical director for a clinic in Mexico, and so she's really, really helpful for us when we're having people come testify in front of Congress. So if any of you actually have experience with the medicine and could testify or become part of that, that would be fantastic. And really, it's a lot about showing support to your legislators in your state when it comes up in your state. And financial support, like I said, like we don't have corporate sponsors. We don't receive any government money. Every dime of the money that's been allocated by the state and federal government is going straight to trials. So we exist just because of the generous donations that we receive, from $5 to $50,000, and that's just from individuals like you all who just want to see healing in the United States.
Just
Dana,
to
I see a
speak
question.
briefly.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, Kate.
Oh,
Lizzie, did
just
you?
just to speak briefly on the piece of journey clinical support, Juanita, I think the way that we would really think about this works, and of course, so we're forming now a relationship with Kristen. We're excited to keep that conversation open for how that can develop in the future, right? When these things are becoming on the pathway to legalization and access. Um, I would say that the biggest way that we would support all of you all is education is so needed. You can think about this call today and how few of us really had so much context on this treatment. It's actually the same for PAP. It's the same for any other psychedelic modality. And so the efforts for Journey Clinical around building community are to connect you all to one another, but even more importantly, in some cases, to connect you in your local communities to educate people about these treatments. And it has to start really, really high level because most people's entry point into this is so far, you know, outside of the context of the information, the education that you all have. And so it really does start with, okay, what is the potential of psychedelic medicine? What can that look like? Why is it important to incorporate psychotherapy? Pieces like that, and having that conversation at a national level is amazing. And there's these big exciting executive orders, but it's the conversations that are happening in the micro hyper local communities that are really where I think that you all can move the needle, and where Journey Clinical is really excited to support you. So we already have, I know, Juanita, you've been hosting. Juanita hosts regular sound baths in New York City, where it's a sound bath and then a follow-up Q&A about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And that is a way that Juanita gets 20 to 30 local folks together and then spreads information about what happens. And then through that is expanding access in her local community. And so that's an example. Journey Clinical sponsors those sound baths. We will work with you to present. We will work with you to put something together in your local community. And so I think in this moment where there is a nationwide conversation about psychedelics, including, okay, so maybe some basic information about cases like Ibogaine or these buzzwords that people are hearing but actually don't have a lot of information about, you all can be really big advocates in that way as well. And we'll support you in that.
Yeah, I would
So get in touch
completely
with me.
agree. Yeah, education and advocacy, public support, public understanding. Most people have just never heard of it before. And then when you say it's a psychedelic, I know that y'all understand that environment as clinicians. And so you've got to like be prepared with that information and be able to share it in a way that people, especially from you guys, because as a clinician, I think you just have so much credibility. Um, I saw a question around Alzheimer's. Okay, so there have not, I don't think I've seen any clinical studies on Alzheimer's, but there is a focus on neurological, I don't know what it's diseases, disorders, anyways, neurological defects. And I actually met somebody, a man who they're doing treatments with for Parkinson's. And so when he went down for his treatment, they don't do a flood dose with a Parkinson's patient. They do 2 weeks of microdosing. And he went down there non-ambulatory in a wheelchair, had trouble with drooling, had trouble with his movements, and now he is completely walking. I mean, he's off his medications, his hands don't shake. Like the effects have been profound. I mean, profound. And so we are seeing improvements, I mean, vast improvements with people who have neurological disorders. But because of the slowing of the QT rate, the medical supervision, I don't know, I guess there's like fear obviously around treating somebody who's already in like a fragile medical state with something that can impact their QT rate and have, impacts on their heart. We haven't seen as much emerge as we would like to, but that will absolutely be part of the conversation. We're already seeing people seek out treatment for Parkinson's and other neurological issues now, and seeing, I mean, like amazing success is like, it was incredible to talk to him and hear about his journey. Another friend that I met is doing a multiple system atrophy, something that I think it's similar, like in that Parkinson's realm, and he has had profound effects as well. All right. Thank you for sharing. Oh, thank y'all for having me. Thank y'all for being so generous with your time. I know a lot of people will catch it on replay. I have a background in social media, and like 90% of viewers come from replay. So I'm so grateful for all of you who made time to show up live with us tonight. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Want to be involved in California? Fantastic. Thank you. Definitely reach out. I'm here. We're looking for you all. We want to talk to you all. We want to have you all involved. If you're in California, you're not far from the clinics in Tijuana and things like that. And we're really excited to see more partnerships form. We don't endorse any particular clinic. We're remaining completely neutral in that, but we do have partnerships with, just conversationally with the owners of like Ambio and Beyond and Transcend and some of the others. And very much appreciate those partnerships. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for being so vulnerable with us, Kristen, and for so much information.
I know.
Like framing the conversation though in that way was just really helpful to get context to level set and then to look towards the future. So we really appreciate you passing on this information to us, and it looks like a lot of us are inspired to continue advocating and passing on this information beyond. So appreciate you, and appreciate you, Bren, for helping make this happen today. Appreciate you all for being here and engaging with conversations like this. And we hope to offer many more opportunities for you to learn and for you to get together. So we'll hopefully see you all soon at another webinar.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.